I know what you're thinking. Did I really just click on a benjimovies video after he hasn't posted in half a year?
I am soaking wet right now.
Me too, Deadpool. Me too. So we are talking Deadpool and Wolverine, the record-breaking, highest-grossing, first-ever R-rated film to find its way into the MCU. And random side note, it's the only MCU film that we're getting in 2024. The only other projects that we're even getting this year are Echo and Agatha All Along. So yeah, Marvel's going real strong right now. Anyways, Deadpool and Wolverine is a mixed bag. There's some amazing elements like the humor, the comic-accurate costumes, the cameos, Hugh Jackman's glamorous, amazing, sweaty body. And there's also some bad. There's some very poor writing choices, way too many questions that don't get properly answered, and maybe the most glaring problem, the villain Cassandra Nova, who really doesn't seem to have much purpose other than to conveniently move the story forward. I mean, she also fingers some of our characters, but I don't really count that as a negative. Amidst all of the good and the bad, there lies a question. One that was discussed heavily prior to the movie's release, and one that I don't think has been discussed enough now that we've had a couple of months to sit with the film. So after a second rewatch and plenty of time to think, I'm going to try to answer that question. Did Deadpool and Wolverine save the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I'm immediately going to answer that question with another question, which I think is like a good interrogation tactic or something. I don't know.
I'm a really good lawyer.
Anyways, I think it's super important to ask what it actually means for Deadpool and Wolverine to save the MCU, and I think there's two main ways to interpret it. The first way that it can quote-unquote save the MCU is simply by being a good movie. Currently, I think the general audience judges the quality of the MCU just based on how much they consistently like the movies within the franchise. When Marvel is on a roll with good releases, people will look at the overall universe in a much better light. I think that's just a pretty obvious thing. I think they had some really good consistency as they were building up to Avengers Endgame. Now, especially since this was a Deadpool movie, the first R-rated MCU film, and they made the bold move of bringing back Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, I think some people just needed this movie to be good. If Marvel couldn't bring this together, they would have slapped the bear that they've already been poking for years. The bear, of course, being Marvel's fan base, which is not to be messed with, especially when they're pissed off. The second way that Deadpool and Wolverine could quote-unquote save the MCU is by altering timelines. I think this is what more people considered and discussed ahead of the release of Deadpool 3, which makes sense considering Deadpool literally gave himself the title of Marvel Jesus in the trailer leading up to the film. We also have to have some sort of way to bring him and a non-deceased version of Logan into the MCU, so very clearly we knew that this would deal with messing up timelines or variants in some way. There's also some comic backing to this with Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. Now, of course, nobody knew what this was actually going to look like. After all, we know that our sacred timeline isn't just gonna get deleted, and unfortunately, we can't just pick and choose what we want to stay and what gets thrown into the dumpster. I would love to just delete She-Hulk from existence. You have no idea how pleased that would make me. But we can't. We can't even pretend that it's in some different universe or alternate timeline because there's too many crossover characters and storylines that will probably be important. It's just, trust me. I spent far too long trying to think of a way to delete this show from existence. In my headcanon, She-Hulk just doesn't exist. Anyways, now that we have some context going into this question, it's time to answer it. Did Deadpool and Wolverine save the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Absolutely not. Man, what if I just ended the video right there? But no. I'm not that mean, so let's dive deeper into this topic than Marvel is diving into the pool of cash they made after releasing this movie. To keep things simple, I'm going to answer this question by discussing the two different ways to interpret the question. So first of all, is Deadpool and Wolverine a good movie? I'm not going to dive too deep into this side of the question. This isn't meant to be a review, so I'll just keep it simple. Yes, in my opinion, I think this is a good movie. However, and this is like a very big however. No. Bigger, bolder. There we go. However, no matter how good this movie is, no matter how good anybody thinks this movie is, that does not suddenly fix all of the issues currently facing the MCU. Even if we just look in years past, we have gotten some really good projects. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was really good. That didn't suddenly make the overall state of Marvel really good. As I mentioned before, it all has to do with consistency, and the last couple of years, we have not been consistently getting good projects. Like, yeah, we've gotten a few, but especially if you're comparing the good projects to the bad projects, you start to realize that it's mostly bad projects. Whereas for the rest of the MCU, I would argue that you could take any 3 to 4 year time stretch and you would have a majority of good projects. Now, you could argue that we're getting way too many projects at this point, and so the numbers are hard to compare. And you could also argue that TV shows are having a big impact on the recent years of Marvel. But that's not my fault. They have decided to release more projects and to dive into TV shows, and that's not an excuse for the poor quality of the projects. But anyways, I don't want to sit on this for too long. What I actually want to discuss is the other side of this question. How does this movie affect the overall state of the MCU? Can this film save Marvel by introducing concepts that allow the timelines to be altered in ways that put the MCU in a much better place moving forward? I think that's hard to answer, so let's go through some of the new concepts that were introduced and I'll give some of my thoughts on them. The first important concept introduced in this movie is pegging. Bro, that's a crazy typo. That is so embarrassing. The first concept that I want to discuss is anchor beings, and we'll put a little subsection here. It has to do with dying timelines. The basic idea behind anchor beings is that each universe has a designated character that timeline relies on to survive. The death of that character results in that universe also dying. We find out that Deadpool's timeline had Logan as its anchor being, so with the death of Logan, now Deadpool's timeline is at risk. At face value, it sounds like an interesting concept that they're bringing into the MCU. I mean, you're literally saying that the entire fate of a universe is dependent upon one character. Kevin Feige has already confirmed that this is going to be crucial moving forward. I mean, he didn't directly say that, but when does Kevin Feige directly say anything?
Who is the anchor being of Earth 616?
I will not tell you that, but I love that you asked, and I love that in just these 37 minutes that term has grabbed onto the imagination of people.
I mean, that's as good as you're gonna get from this man. We all know how he feels about spoilers. I really hope that they can take this concept and do something actually interesting with it. After all, if there is only one anchor being, then they really need to cook with who it is and how that impacts the stakes of the story. The second concept we need to address is the Void. The Void is interesting, but it's also super convenient for Marvel. They can literally take any character they want from any universe, just say that they are in the Void, and then yoink, just grab them, and all of a sudden they're in the main timeline. After all, we learned from this film that all it takes is a Doctor Strange portal, which tons of characters can open at this point. Also, random side note, clearly Doctor Strange was being stupid when he asked,
Is that everyone?
when he literally could have opened even more portals and brought in all the homies from the Void. Anyways, the Void is just OP. Timelines can die, but characters can live. Characters could be too powerful, but be banished and still live in the Void. It's like the quantum realm, but for variants and dead timelines. There's no doubt in my mind this has to be used in the future of the MCU. But the third and definitely most important concept that we need to talk about is that everything is a lie. The end of this movie takes those previously established concepts and it just changes them. Dying timelines, they can now be saved. Anchor beings, they can be replaced. The end of this film shines so much light into the things that we learned throughout the film. It's really that is the guide for how these ideas will play out in the future of the MCU. For instance, while you're watching Deadpool and Wolverine, you start to contemplate who the anchor being might be for Earth 616, our main timeline. What if it was Tony Stark and now the universe is dying? Or what if it was Thanos or something? That would be a bold move. Regardless though, once you get to the end of Deadpool and Wolverine, they basically say, that doesn't matter. Even if Earth 616 has lost its anchor being, it can be replaced. The timeline can be saved. And I just think that that's already a huge misstep because you introduced a concept where you could have the anchor being of our main timeline elevate the stakes of a story, but instead you're just getting rid of that significance because if they do end up dying, we don't have to worry about the timeline. Not only did they already change it, and I'm not the biggest fan of this change, we also still have no clue how any of this works. The end of Deadpool and Wolverine just happens, and apparently, according to the TVA, it is the first time that it has ever happened. Deadpool and Logan did some miraculous work and saved his timeline, and we have no clue what that means. So I don't know how much any of it matters. Ultimately, regardless of how much you enjoy Deadpool and Wolverine, and regardless of how well they can implement concepts to course correct in the future, if they can even do that, the MCU is not saved. Deadpool and Wolverine doesn't fix the Marvels from being a mid-movie. It doesn't fix Quantumania bombing at the box office. It unfortunately doesn't fix people's distaste for She-Hulk. I want Marvel to fix their issues, to lock in and start cooking like they used to. And in my heart, I believe that the MCU can be in a better place like it has been before. But Deadpool and Wolverine doesn't change any of that. It doesn't give me any faith in what is to come. Unfortunately, they can't erase the past, and all we can do is hope that they're learning from it. Bro, where is my copium? I need a hit. I need a hit.